Hello again, everyone. It's good to have you with us for this event. It figures to be an exceptional one that doesn't need any build-up.
Are you ready?
Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop fighting.
This is the main event of the evening.
Athletes, huddle up. It's time to begin. Get focused. Let's go. Athletes, take your mark. Get set. It's time for the Attitude Athlete Podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blue Robinson here. Hey, thanks so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Dang, we greatly appreciate you guys doing so. Thank you so much for everyone that's jumping on our website, attitudeathlete.org. You're going to find tons of information and resources there. You know, really anything you need to know about how Team Addict Athlete works, what's coming up on the horizon for our events, even our team store. It's all there, ready for you to kind of browse and check out and, reach out to us. Our contact information is there also, addicttoathlete.org. Athletes, today I'm excited to share with you a group conversation, a panel discussion that I was invited to talk about betrayal trauma and how addiction plays a very ugly role within it. This was a combination of professionals and life coaches and several therapists. We were able to discuss the sensitive topic of betrayal trauma, and I wanted to share it with you. The full conversation and video links are on our social media pages, and I'd love to get your feedback. But nonetheless, I want to share with you this discussion we had as a panel as we address the topic of betrayal trauma. It's a very sensitive topic, but I'm hoping you guys can get something out of it. So without further ado, let's jump into this. And athletes, thanks for listening.
I'm going to introduce our panel. Welcome, everyone, to our discussion tonight. I'm here with a panel of experts to talk about betrayal trauma and addiction, specifically sex addiction or pornography addiction. We'll talk about all those clarifying pornography and sex. Our whole goal is to offer encouragement and hope and understanding. I am a facilitator of a singles group, Christian singles, and I do various focus on values each month. And this month we're focusing on respect, fair play. I'm a certified mentor, but more than that, I would call myself a collaborator. I love learning from the experts, the people who have had extensive education and experience. And so even though I do some mentoring, I think what I love more in my heart is collaborating with those who have more experience. Then I also, like I said, I facilitate this singles group. And in this group, we have these people. Well, I don't know if all of you are in this particular group, but these are the kinds of people that are there, the experts. We have therapists and life coaches, and we have some college professors and who else? We have public speakers and authors. Anyway, anyone who would support the singles, that some of those experts are also married. So it's just in there to support the singles. So I'm getting all of my talking out because I want you guys to do most of the talking after I introduce you. Kathy Kinghorn is the first one on my list to introduce. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and you guys will have to correct me if I say anything wrong here. She's a therapist and business owner. Name of your business, Kathy Kinghorn. Kathy Kinghorn, coaching.
It is, and I have a couple of them, but that's one. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. And we'll get links we'll share links and all that to connect with any of these people that are on here too, if you want to. She specializes in the treatment of sexual addiction and betrayal trauma. She is in the process of creating a 100-week online curriculum for sexual addiction recovery and betrayal trauma recovery. She has spoken nationally and locally on mental health topics, primarily sexual addiction. And then Marnie Bound, she experienced betrayal trauma after 21-year marriage. She's a public speaker. She recently spoke at the Life After Divorce conference hosted by Brigham Young University. She's married now and has 9 children. And as a result of this blended family, that's 9 children. So how many did you have?
I had 4, he had 5, and then my son got married. So we got 12 of us, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And she's a life coach for anyone needing to heal from betrayal trauma. male or female. I was happy to hear it's for male and female, because I do hear men even are telling me that they would love to see that there's more support out there for them. And she's passionate about supporting, educating, and empowering individuals on how to survive betrayal trauma. And her goal is to instill faith and hope and healing, just like all of us. And then Blue Robinson is clinical mental health clinician. Is that how you say it? Did I say that?
That's fine. Yeah. Clinical mental health counselor. You bet.
Okay. SUDC. Say that. What are the acronyms?
That's a substance use disorder counselor. So duly licensed. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. So he owns Addict to Athlete. It's a nonprofit organization. And you can find them on Facebook and Instagram. We can talk about this a little bit later too, but they do support groups online, correct? Is it online or in person?
Both.
Maybe both. Mm-hmm. You can come and join them, or you can watch it streamed. And then on Wednesdays they also do the Q&A, right?
Yep.
Every Wednesday with your wife.
Yep.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So you can join those, you can watch them. That is awesome. So we'll talk about some of his beliefs of erasing and replacing. Oh, look, there's even the logo on here. Erase and replace. Turn the mess into a message. That's right. And so anyway, they support anyone who is struggling with or in recovery from any addiction. So he understands addiction extensively. He has over almost 9,000 followers, 8.6 thousand followers on his Facebook page. So he knows what he's talking about, and a lot of people are finding success in what he's teaching. So that will be fun to hear a lot of the stuff that you share. And then Raquel Custer, she is a life coach. Oh, we should have you guys raise hands. I'm sorry. So Kathy, raise your hand. Show us who you are. And then Marnie and Blue, the only male on here right now, so you can guess that's Blue. And then Raquel, you raise your hand. Raquel, she's a life coach. She specializes in partner betrayal. She is APSATS, the Association of Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists. She started as a betrayal trauma coach through Bloom for Women, and now has her own private coaching practice, The Healer's Art. She has a bachelor's degree in marriage and family and human development with a minor in sociology, and she's trained as a family life coach. Holly Martinez, raise your hand. Yay, Holly. She's a clinical mental health therapist and works at Therapy Utah. She works with Kathy at Therapy Utah. She specializes in sex addiction and betrayal trauma, working with groups, individuals, and eventually as couples. And she has a passion for EMDR, accelerated resolution therapy, and Sue Johnson's attachment-based, emotional-focused couples therapy. So I'm excited. I actually have, I have written a kind of a brief outline of stuff that I wanted to talk about tonight. And some of the things that we've collaborated about, what their areas of expertise are. So I may address you as the question comes up that may be your specialty, but anyone that's in this call with us, you are welcome to throw in the chat any questions that you have throughout the whole discussion. So I may address someone in specifically, but if you have more to add, please do. You can just stop me, Sherry, I have something else to add. And that's awesome. Perfectly fine. So even though I may think that one person may have an answer, I know that all of you do. All of them have answers. So anyway, this is how we'll do it. So this is funny because it started off with this today. So here, I'll start off with this, my belief. I believe that, I wrote this down too, I have to read it. I believe that when someone is in full recovery, that they are able to see, they don't blame others. They're not going to blame anyone else for their pain. But part of the healing is to see both sides. You do have to see what's happening, and you can't be just in oblivion and think that you're always making, that it's all one-sided or not the other. But I do believe that if you're open to a healthy relationship, and if you are still in healing, then you definitely still need to have validation, of course, for where you are. But I believe that with healthy attachments and connections and building trust, that takes looking at ourselves, and we can talk about that, different ways of healing and finding hope. But you may be in different places. Those of you who are listening to this, it may be in a place where you still need to be validated for what you're feeling. And that's so important. We want you to know that both of you. So here's the challenge, Kathy, you guys can tell any of you that are therapists. How is it to validate both parties at the same time? When a couple comes into your office and someone says, I have an addiction, or I don't have an addiction, whatever, to a couple that comes in, and you have to validate both parties. So we can talk about some of that. So here's the first question. Gosh, I feel like I've just been rambling and I'm done. Can't be done yet. So first question that came up to me that was brought up is that they would love for you to define, and I will direct this to Blue first, if you don't mind, Blue. Yeah. Define what is addiction? How do they know if it's an addiction? Some are saying, I don't have an addiction, it's just a compulsion, and I don't have an addiction.
Yeah. It's a great question. Addiction is simply a pattern of compulsive behaviors that really do kind of start to have very strong like issues in the degrees of social lives, occupation, maybe legal, and it has consequences. And despite those negative consequences, they continue on. And so, the DSM has changed a little bit from dependence and abuse, but I still kind of refer to that quite a bit, because there's a huge difference between someone that gets dependent on something versus someone that abuses a substance or a behavior. And it is kind of an interesting, I guess, paradigm that we're in right now, where some of the sexual addiction doesn't quite register yet the DSM. It needs to, because it's very prevalent. But when you look at the cause of addiction, I'm a firm believer that it's all stems from some place in trauma. And so that's why I'm eager to hear from our panelists today too, because there's going to be a lot of light shed on so many different aspects of this. But to simplify it down to its Cliff Notes version, I would say it's a pattern of compulsive behaviors. And, despite those negative consequences, it continues and it increases. The secrecy, the gaslighting, all that stuff kind of floods in, because at the core of the person who's battling the addiction, there's a core issue in there that they haven't identified yet, that they're afraid to get to. And that's where all of you panelists and all of us come in to help them discover that. I believe that addiction can be cured. I think with the right principles and with the right set of team like we've got assembled here, I'm a firm believer it can be overcome. I've seen it. So excited to be here and to participate in this way.
Very good. Thank you. So yes, I mentioned a little bit that Coach Robinson is it's for general addiction. His specialty is addiction as a broad topic. Yeah. So anything that has to do with how addiction works. And then Kathy, I wanted to defer to Kathy if there's anything that is specific to sex addiction that might be any different than what we say about general. What I've heard is that the pornography or the sex addiction is the substance, if you will. That's what they turn to, and instead of the drugs or the alcohol. That's how I've seen it. So maybe the behaviors might be the same. I'm not sure. How do you speak to that? Is it?
Thanks, Sherry. So it's interesting. It was just 2011 that the body that decides what goes into the diagnostic manual and what is considered an addiction. In just 10 years ago, they finally included behavioral addictions. It used to be, hey, you can get addicted to a substance. We get that. But just in the short past, they said, hey, wait a minute, we cannot deny the fact that individuals get addicted to behaviors. Gambling is a behavioral addiction. Mm-hmm. And even though that's in the DSM, anyway, yes, it's getting addicted to a specific type of sexual behavior. So you might think, well, I've never gone to a prostitute. I can't go to 12-step groups because those guys are talking about going to I would never do that. Probably true. Maybe that's not your arousal type. So that would never interest you to do that particular form of sexually acting out. So there's a very well researched different forms of specific sexual behaviors that people act out on, and the reasons for that. But yeah, sexual addiction does at some level involve a sexual act. But how it involves a sexual act is quite fascinating to me. So I'll just give you a quick example. Somebody that's an exhibitionist, the old school world was flasher. Well, that's not really sexual, right? It's like, we're okay, I showed my genitals. But what their trigger is fear. They want and need to see fear in your eyes. So if one of my clients might flash somebody, and you don't get afraid, they'll go around and 60, 70, 80 people they'll flash that day to get that hit from your fear. Mm. So there's a lot of different reasons that people act out sexually. And now I'll stop.
Oh, no, that's good. That's really good. No, that's good to define because, and I like that you pointed out that it's not necessarily noticed by all. Maybe all therapists might not even recognize it as even an addiction. They might just say it's not. Well, that's good. I'm glad you pointed that out. So, Kathy, here are some other questions that I know your area of expertise are the neurological effects. Like, tell us about the physiological effects of addiction, and maybe Blue can speak to that as well.
You know what?
Brain. What is it in the brain? What happens?
One of the things that's so fascinating to me, just from a Christian perspective, scientists keep proving the Christian knowledge, I think, to be accurate. I'll give you an example. What happens with addiction is it shrinks our dopamine receptors, and we can see that. I could show you a picture of those actually shrunken. So what happens is they get overused, where dopamines are what scientists call our joy receptors. That's what scientists call it. Mm. And to get that dopamine in, it starts to shrink. So we crave that hit, but we can't get that same big hit because they're shrunk. Mm. So think about it. If you imagine, and maybe we shouldn't, but let's just maybe for the moment imagine a council that the adversary got together and he said, look, guys, we got to go after him. We got to go after them hard and we got to hit their brain. What do you guys think? With laser-like precision, the adversary went after what scientists call our joy receptors. Men are that they might have joy. What did he go after? Our joy receptors.
Wow. I like that. Insightful. That makes a lot of sense too. Wow.
Yeah.
So, now, Marnie, well, let me see. If we're jumping ahead too fast, I don't want to jump ahead too fast. Does anyone else have anything that they want to say about addiction or?
I would just add to what she said with that. I mean, specifically, I was in a leadership position in my church for 5 years, and I got to lead this little ward for a little while. And that was the number one issue that I dealt with more so than anything was pornography addiction. And the problem I saw with it too is that because it's so natural, it is the most difficult thing to overcome in any addiction. I mean, you're talking chemical dependency is like a walk in the park compared to this because of that. And so she's absolutely right. It shrinks that dopamine receptor down, and nothing brings joy. With the guilt and the shame that's attached to that, it really does wreak havoc. So she's right. The adversary knew exactly what he was doing to tarnish that aspect because it is a plague. So I agree 100%.
I'm so glad you said that. And what it makes me think of is if you do the reverse cycle of our actions come from our feelings, and our feelings are motivated by our thoughts. So anything that we put into our minds is going to create the thoughts and the actions and the feelings. Anyway, so that's what I thought about. That's why he would go there. Yeah, Holly.
If I can add something too.
Yeah.
No, I totally forgot what I was going to say now.
The thoughts and the temptations and the working on our brains, working on our thoughts. Is that what you were thinking about?
Well, I was just kind of thinking about the sexual addiction, and We all have different, as Kathy was saying, different arousal templates. And we're all trying to get a need met. Something that's different about sex addiction that might be different against maybe drugs and alcohol and other types is that we're actually not trying to take the sex away, right? It's something that we're actually want to be a healthy part. So there's managing that, is that it's not about going dry. To have a sexual health, a sexual healthy sexuality isn't about cutting out sex from your life, but using it in a healthy way that, through positive coping skills and using it to connect. So it's a little bit different than some of the ones where we just take it away.
I'm glad you said that. Someone asked me when I told them that I worked for a therapist that specialized in sex addiction. They said, sex addiction. He was just shocked. And he said, so how do they cure that? Sobriety? Like, no, does that mean abstinence? Is that how you cure it? So anyway, I said, no, they cure it with connection is my answer. Anyway, we can talk about that too. Yeah. Well, let's just talk about that since we're on it. So the opposite of addiction is, who would say the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. That's what I've heard. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that, but.
Well, I think it's more than just connection to others. It's also connection to self, connection to a higher power. So it's being able to connect with all of those, not just that one person.
Oh, okay. That's very good. Okay, so
I'll touch base on that too. One thing I've noticed just with my own clients and stuff that I've worked with, specifically with married couples, is that there's these 3 stages. And the problem I'm seeing is that we have a real hard time understanding how to love someone and then allowing them to love us back. So, we have to learn how to love someone, but then how to allow them to love us back. And what I've noticed is that when you first, have an initial attraction and you're falling in love, that's a great stage, right? I mean, you remember what that was like, on the telephone all night, your battery goes dead and you just want to be with that person all the time. Well, eventually, that's going to wear off. Masks come off, realities kind of kick in, maybe marriages happen. And eventually, I think everyone goes through what I would say with the stage 2, falling out of love. It's kind of like, wait a minute, I'm aligning myself with this person and there's all these kind of like hidden things I didn't know of. And that's a real hard thing. Now, you can get through this, and that's the 3rd stage, learning how to love and learning how to be loved. But what I've noticed is that we're having a real hard time getting there, because we've kind of forgotten what that even is. So I love what she's saying about making sure that these aren't just abstinent-based conversations. They have to be very emotionally detailed, which, let's face it, men, we have a really hard time opening up to that side of us. It's confusing. Many times we have, people in our lives, maybe even like parents, that may not have shown how to love and be loved. And so there's such a chaotic experience to be dealt with that. And what I've noticed is that we're struggling with what authentic love means for ourselves and to allow someone else to love us as we love them. It is turbulent.
Yeah, that is so true. So we can always come back to this too. But I did want to talk about, and I keep thinking of deferring to Marnie, and that is, what is the loved one? What is the loved one's experience? And all of you can speak to this. Kathy, I can quote Kathy. She, when we first talked, she said, the way that she thought about betrayal trauma is you can't be betrayed until you have trusted. So that means that you have it in you to trust, right? And it's learning how to trust again. But what is it that breaks the trust? Marnie, anything that you have to say about defining the effects, the characteristics of the spouse? What happens when they learn of their spouse's behaviors?
So I feel like when I found everything out, it really was the shattered world. Like everything in my life and the way that I saw it wasn't true. I saw that there was this other life. I'd been married for 21 years to someone who had his acting out had evolved to an extremity of prostitutes, strippers. I hadn't known about anything really with pornography. Looking back now, I can see being educated, but I only caught pornography the first year in our marriage of the 21 years. So when I caught his work phone, and also he was that spiritual, Christ-like leader person that even when things didn't seem right, I believed who he showed me who he was. And I would even kind of make excuses for him in ways because it had to be true. I convinced myself of his truths in a lot of ways, the whole gaslighting, things like that. Anyway, so for me, the actual discovery, which we refer to as the D-Day, was when it ultimately just fell apart. And I pulled on a string that just kept going back farther and farther and farther and farther back. And the most difficult part, I think, for me in that experience was the lack of trust that I had in myself. I am a naturally trusting person, but everybody's bank account of trust, if you want to call it that, was zero. And it was easy to gain back for, family and friends, specific people. But for myself, I feel like I am almost the one that took the longest because I didn't trust my own judgment. And I have a college degree. I'm educated and outgoing, and I will address things. I'm not willing to do that. And so I couldn't understand how I didn't see. I had been around family members who are alcoholics, involved with drugs. So for me to, again, be living with someone who was involved with this, but I didn't believe that they could be, I just thought, what is wrong with me? I'm so dumb. And then to follow up, so many people would be like, did you really not know? Or how did you really not know? And again, it goes back to what Kathy's saying. Like, I really did trust so much of what he was. So, there's so much of the PTSD symptoms that kind of come along with that, where I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. My mind it was almost like it was hijacked. I would be driving and not remember where I was because I was literally trying to piece conversations and timelines of where I was and what was really happening. And then, just like the nightmares, there was a long list for me that really took a long time, and not even really being able to be the mom that I needed to be for my kids because I was so distracted in my new life and what is my marriage and where are we going? And I had him move out and with the intent to have him move back in, but it just, again, pulling on things that he continued his behavior and fighting for someone who's not fighting for you, that he just really wanted, in my experience, wanted it to go back to normal. But to me, I now knew, and it wasn't normal. And in ways it was almost more hurtful that he knew I knew and would still go act out.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Marnie. It takes a lot of courage to share that. There are a lot of women I know that experience that are not as, not ready to share it publicly. So I know that you speak to a lot of women. There are other experiences too, and anyone that wants to share can definitely share. But I know that there are different levels. Maybe I would even correct me if I'm wrong with this. You all know more than I do. Are there different levels of the trauma, betrayal trauma? I wonder I can tell from your story why that would be considered trauma, because it was such a shock. I would say trauma might be something that's out of your expectation, or maybe. Mm-hmm. But how would any of you betrayal trauma specialists, how would you describe that to a client who's new to this? What does the betrayal trauma mean? Why do you call it trauma? Does anyone want to speak to that, Raquel? We haven't given you too much chance to talk, and I know you have some great things to say about this too, if you want to.
Sure. Was reading something last night that kind of stood out, and it was an important part of my own healing, just understanding the trauma that comes from being betrayed by the person that you trust the most, along the lines of what Kathy shared, I think. And there's a little bit of a history of how we've moved into viewing this through the trauma lens and understanding that betrayal causes trauma, or at least when that's the lens that you're going from, if that makes sense, or the school of thought that you follow, being betrayed by a partner, significant other. And that can even go into other relationships, experiencing betrayal from someone who's supposed to provide safety and security, and that's where you experience betrayal. So yeah, if that helps.
Yes, Marnie.
And I would say for me, in my experience, that I don't know that I can even compare the trauma or the level of trauma, because when I found pornography on the computer the first year into our marriage, I mean, this is when the internet was so new and I didn't even know what I was looking for, and it happened to just kind of come my way. But I felt like he had cheated on me then. In that moment, in that level, that was really difficult. And so then fast forward now, prostitutes and strippers like that. I can't say that discovery came across like even harsher or anything. I think in some ways, because of some of the patterns over the years of getting to that point, feeling like things were off, but I couldn't pinpoint it, actually became a relief to me that I wasn't crazy. And so to say that we like to compare what the trauma, and I know that after that first initial D-Day, I had several like discoveries that followed that in some ways became more traumatic. Like when I found out he'd had an affair earlier in our marriage, and we've been totally divorced by this point, that it came forward. And it was just, it knocked me out. Like another thing, you know, I thought I couldn't hear anything new. So anyway, that's my thought for me. But it is when it's someone, as Raquel was talking about, that you're supposed to lean on and trust. And that's part of the trauma, is that this was supposed to be my person. And so, but this is the person that's hurting me. And I don't know who to go to when I'm hurting, because it's supposed to be him, but he's the one that's hurting me. And I don't really trust right now. And I don't, anyway, so that's that thought. I think Holly, you had something you were going to say too.
Yeah. Good. You know, Peter Levine says that trauma is just anything that our system can't handle or process, right? So whether we're talking about little trauma, big trauma, luckily we don't have to define it, right? You know, and we all experience it differently. You know, kind of what Marnie was saying, it can be the same experience, can be little or big for someone, but how's our nervous system, how's our body taking that in? And so luckily, in order to heal or in order to work on trauma, we don't have to say, you know, whether this is a big or little trauma, we don't really need to define it, I think, but it's more just we're going to kind of treat them the same way.
Thank you for that clarification. It's true. I can see how what you're saying, that there's not levels. Loss is loss. Betrayal is betrayal. No matter how it's coming, it's going to still hurt. And so, there's no way for anyone to decide how heavy or light that person's trauma is. It's just not, it just needs to be addressed and supported.
You know, another interesting thing about betrayal trauma, it actually has the ability to cause a change in your heart physically. It's called broken heart syndrome. The clinical name is Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, and it's because they discovered it in Japan in the 1990s, and your heart takes the shape of the octopus trap temporarily.
Wow.
Most people survive it, a very high percentage. I can't remember the percentage, but it's broken heart syndrome. I did a little thing on this before, but the reason I bring that up is that nobody tells you how visceral the pain is. The pain is at a cellular level, and your heart actually breaks physically. It's not a metaphor. It's not when the spouse is saying, my heart feels like it's broken. It's like, it is physically for a time, and certainly healing comes, but that can be the impact on somebody's physiology, which is pretty significant, obviously.
Yes, thank you. There are a few men on this call. One I know is here for supporting of his girlfriend who has gone through this. So he's grateful to be here and hear these things. And then one of the participants commented that he's very grateful to you, Marnie, for sharing your story. It's really good to hear the insights that, you know, how are the women, what is their experience, or the men. I mean, that I also brought up that men and women both experience betrayal trauma. It's not just gender specific. I'm curious, Coach Blue, if this is, so are you also supportive of spouses in your program? So they just both come together for your support groups? That's what I was wondering about. So side by side, you just come to understand addiction and understand supporting the family. And that's awesome.
Absolutely. And so, you know, not just the 501c3, I also do my private practice here as well. So I do a lot of family therapy called couples therapy. And we kind of obviously do a lot of like the sports analogies and whatnot. We talk about building and strengthening your home team. You've got to have a strong home team. And that home team is kind of like, you know, the couple, and then the players, the kids, everybody has their roles and responsibilities, and you want it to be operating like a dynasty team, right? You don't let things come into your home that are going to tarnish, you know, your home court record. And so what I've noticed, and we don't separate them. I don't do like Al-Anon and AA. We bring them together so they can learn from each other. And it gets to some interesting places because there has to be complete honesty. And that's one of the things that is so rough with this. Trust is something that, we've talked a lot about tonight. And what I kind of do is trust is not earned. It's a gift. And we teach the premise of like, you've got to be delicate with who you gift that trust to. Because you can earn a tons of trust, but then one thing goes wrong and you lose the whole battle. So we teach about like, hey, be cautious who you give your trust to, and know that if it's tarnished, you can take it back, and it's too fragile for you right now. And I think it comes in increments. But yeah, we do both together. And there's been times when, unfortunately it's not going to work. Like I said, even when I was, serving in my church, there were times when I had to counsel separation and divorce, and it got me in a little hot water with some other people that were higher than me. But I'm like, look, this person's not wanting to change. Their heart is at war, and this isn't going to work for her. And so it's a delicate balance, but it's a huge thing too. And I've noticed, I don't know how you guys feel about this. I'm not a big one on this. The fact that we call a member in this situation a victim, it burns a little bit because, my mother went through this. I mean, my mother was married when she was 14. So she was a kid having kids, and married and divorced 8 times and put us kids through just garbage. And so I watched her single life and the way that she was traumatized by husband after boyfriend after husband. Subsequently, my sisters went down that same pattern. And so, what if I don't mind me asking a question, I'd love to ask some of you, how do you get your feet underneath you to stand up? Because I've watched so many women in my life, like my mother, my sisters, never stand up after that. They've had 4 or 5 divorces, each of them. And it's been rough to kind of see this. And I take myself out there and I get married one time and I'm like, we're going on 22 years. I'm like, I don't want all that stuff. But I'm curious, how do we move out of that victim stance? Because it burns me to have people call themselves that. And I get it. I understand it, but none of you are victims. Like, you guys they're strong. You're strong individuals. And so I'm curious how you get your feet back under you once it's exposed, once it's understood, because I never got to see that in my own realm, if that makes sense.
Yes. Who wants to address that one? That's all of you could probably address it. Everyone can give their 2 cents.
Blue, there's such good research on post-traumatic growth. And I think that trauma is kind of like, it seems to me like it's a magnet. You get something happens and it just, all of your trauma just magnetizes to it, right? But post-traumatic growth is a real thing. We see it all the time. And people, absolutely, if you're living on this earth, you have been victimized at some point in your life, but to stay in that victim stance won't help you heal. It won't help you grow. And so you can, no matter what, when I turned 40 and my life just blew up like nothing I saw coming. Yeah, the pain is real, and you have to keep choosing in. It's not a moment, for me at least, it's not a moment where I choose to, no, it's crawling through days and then possibly, standing up on a couple before you trip and fall down again and then get going. But that growth mindset, that this is going to be a challenge rather than this happened to me and I'm out, makes all the difference.
That's awesome. Yeah, does anyone else want to speak to that? Holly, I can see you might have something.
I always have something.
Good. If you want to share.
I think kind of what they're saying is, yeah, it's okay to say I have been victimized, right? Like, I have been hurt. But as Kathy was saying, I always, that doesn't have to be where we stay. We can be tender with that. We can be gentle with that. We can be empathetic. I always tell my women when they're in the first days of group, they're angry that they're there. They're like, I don't want to be here. I shouldn't have to be paying this money. I shouldn't have to be sharing my story. I didn't put us here. So it comes in with a lot of anger. And the one thing that, when I hear the women leaving on the other side is they say, I came in here because my husband looked at pornography or because he had an affair, and I'm leaving knowing who I am. I'm leaving knowing my strengths. I'm leaving knowing how to process my emotions. I'm learning. I've been able to get through my own trauma. And so it never fails. They come in because of one thing and they're leaving, a totally different person. And that's where we kind of see that growth that Kathy, I went to a symposium on the post-traumatic growth. And Elizabeth Smart was speaking, right? She said, I never would wish this on my worst enemy. We all know what, hers is much bigger if we're measuring trauma, right? But she said, I never would wish this on my worst enemy. But she said, because I went through this moment of time, right? This pain, this moment of your world comes crashing down. We can all remember where we were, right? The world starts crashing down. Because she said, because I went through this, now I'm a stronger person. I'm more empathetic. I do things that I never would have done before. I know who I am, right? So it can push us to this amazing place if we kind of keep rowing, if we keep trying and it's foggy and it's day by day, but it can be a blessing, even though we're never probably grateful for the action.
That's good. And Blue, I want to say something to interject, and then Marnie for sure. Something that I've learned and what I talk to of the people in our group are, the name of the group is Thriving Singles Community. And so anyone that comes in there are people who are ready they're doing the work and they're wanting to thrive regardless of their circumstances. And the reason why I thought to do this group is that my healing came when I decided, when I realized that I was victim. I was hurting and everyone was validating me in my pain. Anyone that I would tell the story to, I didn't tell a lot, but anyone that I did, I was validated in my pain. And I could have stayed there forever. It was a comfort thing for me. And I think that's really common. But I did hear from one of the self-help personal development courses. They said, you can stay here or you can see how it's serving you, or you can decide to get out of that and see that being validated is what is serving you, but being outside of validation is where you're going to find your healing. Brilliant. And look at yourself and see what Holly was saying, what can I do to make a difference now? What now? And so in this group, that's what I say is, I'll validate you to the moon and back, but then I want to say, okay, now what? Now, what is your next step? So I think what your experience with your mom and maybe your sisters is that it's more common to just say, I'm a victim and I'm in a rut and men suck. I'm not going to have anything to do with men for as long as I live. Or you can say, there are other options out there. And anyway, I can learn from this and
brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. Marnie.
I was going to say even a different twist on that was I didn't think I had been in an abusive marriage. For me, I was already through the divorce process when I was in a therapy session, and I declared that he was not abusive. There was no yelling or even arguing. And then I continued to go through as she stopped me with all the ways he was so emotionally abusive, financially abusive, spiritually abusive, sexually abusive. And I remember getting off that call and just crying in bed, and I could not believe or accept even for myself that I was a victim of abuse, that even as I came to understand what that looked like and what that was. And then even for my family who, again, my dad's a judge, he deals with people, he should feel and my brother, to recognize these kind of things, and that they themselves didn't either, And so I think that was where it took me to that space of, wow, I was a victim, but I don't choose to stay here. Kind of, we talked about I'm going to have a tent and I'm going to fill it and I'm going to work through it, but I'm not going to build a log cabin here. And I want to move on so I can say that I have been victimized and I understand it and I recognize it, because I still have to interact with this person who still can be so emotionally abusive, but now I get to recognize it. And even though I'm disappointed at times that I revert back to my role that I was in our marriage, and the taking it and then having my moments of no, I know exactly what he's doing and I am not doing this again, And so it has taken that practice of, again, gaining my own confidence and working through to recognize I was absolutely victimized and I didn't even know, but I'm moving through and I want to choose different and educate myself so I can be more aware, even in the redating and being out and interacting with other people. It's interesting how you start to recognize, and, teenagers in Darvo. That's amazing. Don't we all see that? Like, wait, I know what that is.
Yes. So who wants to answer the questions about dating? You guys all are leading us just this conversation beautifully. This is the next thing I want to talk about is, so that's what I would say is, so what now? Now, what kind of advice can we give to those who are now wanting to date? Well, just all about boundaries and dating. Well, all about what does recovery look like? I actually heard, I'll tell you this before we hear your answers. When I worked for Dr. Red, there were a few clients who were telling me, I will never date a man who looks at pornography or who has looked at pornography. If he's ever looked at it, I'm not going to date him. And I asked Dr. Red, what are his 2 cents on that? And what is your advice for someone who said that? And he said, definitely you want to understand, where they are in their recovery. But he said the men who have, and I would say probably women too, but anyway, the people who have gone through the recovery are stronger than those who have not. And so if you are looking for someone who is a partner that is loyal and who is high integrity and firmly, solidly committed to the relationship, it would not be a bad idea to date someone who has been there. So that was encouraging to me, that I don't have to make that be I wouldn't have to make that be my red flag or whatever. And no one else, either any of the clients that we were working with, it doesn't have to be something that you're concerned about, but someone who is doing the work. So who wants to talk about what does recovery look like? What does it look like? What do you look for if you're dating? Who do you look?
I feel like I'm talking so much.
No, it's perfect. Anyone that has anything to say is perfect. Thank you.
I would say for myself, and especially in working with clients, is kind of the whole thing we're talking about, that self-love. Like if I can't identify and know what I value in myself, then for me, it's hard to find that. Then we're constantly seeking in other people. And again, when you've experienced betrayal trauma, how I didn't always trust myself. So, but if I trust someone else who I don't really know that well, more than myself, I'm not really in a good space. So a lot of it is creating a foundation. And I work on I am statements with my clients, a lot of helping them know things to be true. A lot of times they work through, or maybe they don't necessarily know, but it's working to really believe who they are. And then also identifying these red flags and deal breakers, and then green flags and yellow flags. And some of that comes through the dating process, but sometimes I have to be my own accountability partner, or even to my client, I am their accountability partner to say, okay, this is what you said was a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. And now you're saying, because you really think he's super cute, that you're willing to bend that. And so let's go back to why you created that, is that was a deal breaker. And then reevaluate, is this person worth moving forward with, And so, but again, sometimes feeling like the options aren't out there, the sifting process is exhausting. And certainly I bet you all can nod that it is, you have to have tough skin being in the dating, because even though you maybe don't want them, all of a sudden it becomes really personal when they don't want to talk to you either, and we want to know why and what did we do, when really, as we were talking about, attraction is the number one thing. So it's either there or it's not. And it's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Well, and someone who is still in the trauma hasn't fully healed, then that physical attraction may be a triggering thing to them. Like someone talking to you about how beautiful or sexy you are, it could be triggering to them, and depending on what the relationship was like or how they were treated. And that's something too that I know therapists can help you work through, and coaches. But Kathy, what I just keep thinking to ask you, all of you guys have great things and you all can interject this, but what would you tell someone, Kathy, if you're like, even if like a premarital counseling, do you do any of that premarital counseling, and you talk to each other about what to look for, what to be cautious for? Do you do any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the short answer is, do they take responsibility for keeping themselves safe?
Yeah.
Honestly, and if no, then move along. But
explain that.
But if yes, like, how do you keep yourself safe day to day? And they're very specific, that they say, well, I'm not on electronics after 10, and I know how my dailies, I make time for those. They're important to me. And I know when to reach out to my therapist and get what I call a tune-up session. And I don't go to places that basically, to keep yourself safe, you have to adjust your safety plan depending on the situation you're in. When the risk goes up, your safety plan should go up. So just a quick example, I just had one of my guy, a client, say he's going to Vegas. And I said, well, what's your safety plan? He's got a legitimate work thing. And he said, if I get sideways down there, I've got group members' phone numbers and I'm going to call them. So that's a terrible safety plan. That's your safety plan for here. You're not even in, what are you talking about? You've been in recovery. It's been in recovery 7 years. I said, you know better than that safety plan. So it really is. It's such a good discussion point, I think, to understand, because if you're dating somebody, sometimes kind of back to a little bit of what Marnie touched on, you can get a sense of, I don't want to shame them. And I don't think individuals with addiction, shaming anyone doesn't help anything.
Right.
But you don't want to also feel like I'm overstepping and I'm going to help them through this and be supportive. And any one of us could talk for a long time on the dangers of enabling and all those things. So it's really, how do you keep yourself safe? And when do you know you're at risk?
Yeah.
And then keep going one level down. And that should get you enough information to know what to bring up with your therapist about moving forward.
That's true. So Blue, I'm thinking of, so I have two different experiences with addiction. My father was an alcoholic. I grew up with an alcoholic father, and he was, when he passed away, 26 years sobriety. So we learned all about all the different things that he went through and support of him and his journey. I'm just, anyway, I just threw that. Now I'm lost track of what I was saying. What do you say to your clients? What does recovery look like to your clients? What do you say, what to look for? So I'm right here and I'm enthralled in addiction. What will recovery look like for me? You said vulnerability and honesty. You can expand on that.
For sure. I mean, the first thing I look for when I'm working with couples is their communication styles. It's one of the most interesting things. Most of them come in under extreme duress. And so it's interesting to see the control talk and the reactive listening that goes on. And even these subtle jabs and whatnot, you can tell real close who's working and who's not. You got one search talker who's kind of reflectively listening, but the other one's very defensive and reactively listening. Just by the opening conversation I have with them, you can kind of tell who's working and who's not. And so it's getting them into that I don't know, that degree of communication by which they can ask questions and teach each other what's working and what's not working, instead of trying to pick apart one another and see who's stronger and who can stay in the corner the longest while they're getting sucker punched. I've noticed that there's a lot of humility that comes into this. What I've really stressed with my athletes and my clients alike is that you have to allow yourself to become emotionally vulnerable, and that's a very scary thing, specifically when you look at what's at stake. I don't know about the rest of the therapists in here, but for me, when I get people in, they're way past usually what I can help them with. They don't come in to get counseling until it's like the bitter end. And so, I would say that one of the strongest things you guys can do is, like you said, check in those dailies. I think there's something you need to do every day to be able to maintain that relationship, that if you ignore or if you put off to the side, you will slip. I saw that you posted my acronym for a relapse, right? We don't talk about relapse unless you are full blown back into it. If you have a slip, an acronym for sobriety has lost its purpose, well, then we have to reestablish what that purpose is. What is the purpose of even trying to strengthen this marriage or even regain the balance in it? If you don't have a purpose in it, then there's no sense in even trying. Like you've got to have a degree of why you're doing this, and then move on from there. But just from the opening conversations, I can tell who's working and who's not.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. And then I don't know if I'd be like saying, okay, so going back to my therapist to say, well, is he in recovery? Ask secretly. I don't know. Yes, Holly.
I mean, I was blessed, right, to be single in my late 30s, right? Not, not by choice, but it is hard, and it's hard out there. Really, it's hard to say when we're in full recovery, right? Because recovery can take years and years and years, but have we done enough recovery, right? To know ourselves, to me, it really helped to know my values of what was important. And most people, it didn't last more than a few weeks, because those red flags are pretty big flying at this age, I feel like. But as we got to know the things I was looking for, when you said, how do you know, right? You're looking for honesty, transparency, accountability, that proactiveness and that consistency, right? I can show up one day, but can I show up for months at a time, right? Can I, and I think that's one of the biggest things. You can really feel recovery. You can feel it because it's lived. They're setting their own boundaries. They're transparent. There's so many great things that once you know what you're looking for are really helpful when you're dating.
Oh, that's so good. So I would love to talk about, and you guys, like I said, I'm not going to have a problem with you guys bringing any of the other topics back if we're moving too fast. But I would love to talk about the things that each of you do to help your clients. The different modalities, how do you decide what modality to use, or if it's just the talk therapy, or Marnie touched a little bit on being able to help to strengthen self-image. There's some techniques and stuff that you can do to help. Anyway, so I would love to hear, how do you help someone in recovery? And I do want to bring this up. Everyone who is in here, all of our guests were screened to some degree. I asked if you are sympathetic to both sides. So that tells me that they're in a place where they are, whatever it is, if it's them experiencing it or they're wanting to learn about it. But if it was someone who is new in just maybe a new divorce or new in the discovering the betrayal trauma, they might not be as open to hearing the other side. So I think the people that are, anyway, so I'm just saying that because whatever you might describe may be something that the people in here are already familiar with a little bit, but it would be nice to know. And then Kathy and Holly, I know you guys have some courses coming up and stuff. There are other people in this call that do other things, but I would love to know how you guys support your clients. How can we find healing and hope from what you offer? We'll start with yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you have an order?
Nope, I don't. I was gonna make an order if no one piped up.
Yeah, no, and I still had Blue's question in mind. I know it seemed like we were all really moved by your statement about your family, Blue, your mom and sisters, and how did we do it? And so I felt like that went well with your question, Sherry, about like what do I do to support partners in their healing? And I feel like I had a long list because I feel like I've always thought of an individual's journey of healing kind of their own, but there are certainly things that are common to the healing process, and especially with trauma and addiction. And so maybe I won't go over like the whole list, but it occurred to me maybe just sharing, what has been maybe one of the most valuable things of my journey and of those that I work with is just knowledge and truth, I think is maybe one of the things that so education, basically really good, solid education, Yeah, and just being able to understand the truth about like what is addiction and where does it come from, and and how do we heal, and the same thing with understanding betrayal trauma. It was for me, and what I think has been valuable to share in the healing process for others is, again, for me, like the truth about what is it really. The school of thought of trauma itself was a huge part of my healing. So going from maybe older views or some of the original views about family members and addiction to, the trauma lens is much newer than some of the other models. And I know that understanding myself and the trauma response and understanding, like safety seeking and other things. And then the truth about addiction itself, so that you're not, internalizing or self-blaming, for someone else's addiction or choices. And then, like it was shared earlier, I think just being able to move from wanting to being so motivated to heal, to save, my family or my marriage, and then ultimately moving to healing and potentially saving myself, if that makes sense. And so so there's so much, but I felt like that was maybe one thing I could chime in. So.
The first step is truth, and Marnie touched on it. And this is not saying this. I would be afraid that I could offend someone, but I'll say it anyway. From what I understand, some of the behaviors of addiction might be that. Well, I heard the example from I don't remember his name, from a doctor. And he described that when someone has an addiction, it's like they're being held underwater. And you're the person that is, or you're the assassin, you're trying to take their life from them by trying to take this addiction from them. You're the one that's trying to kill them, hold them underwater, because their addiction is what is keeping them alive. So I'm not describing this very good. It's their lifeline, right? And that's how I understood it, is if you are trying to help them to get over this addiction because it's not working for your marriage, then you're going to be considered the assassin. And so all of their behaviors would reflect that. And that's where a lot of the triggering comes up. And what Marnie explained is the gaslighting. And it's because, and I would always say, it's not the person, it's not this evil person that you're married to, but it's that addiction that's trying to hang on to that lifeline. And the behaviors come with that. And then Holly, we spoke on the phone today a little bit about this, and you said, and you can touch on this, and then we can talk a little more too about what you guys do with your clients. And then we will end soon, as long as you guys want to, but I'll try to end within the next 15 minutes or so. But Holly and I had a conversation today, and she talked of how she might help an individual would be different than how you'd help a couple. You can talk of that. That's 3 clients that you have, the woman and the man and the couple. Anyway, you can describe that, because that's where I think we're headed, is to talk about how you would help clients, individuals or couples.
Well, and just know, as we've talked about, there's lots of ways to do this, right? So, I mean, the practice where I work at Therapy Utah might be a little bit different, but we're really hesitant to bring the couple in right away, right? Because it's kind of that third person it's not that we won't bring them in for logistical things, but really that deep connecting thing. It's that third person in the marriage, which is the addiction. So we kind of push that individual work first, so that there can be a little bit of safety to bring the couple together. And that individual, I mean, we do a lot of group work. We do a lot of, that left brain stuff of just kind of getting my coping skills, learning about the fear cycle, learning about boundaries, right? And all those things, and working through our emotions in healthy ways. And then for me, kind of the icing on the cake is that deeper trauma work, which is my favorite, which is, if we look at the way trauma is stored in the body, it isn't stored. We can't think our way out of trauma. So it's stored in a different part of the body that can't tell time, right? That's why some of us who are in recovery, 10 years down the road, we have a moment, right? When we get that text or when something happens, it's like, I thought I was over this, right? But that trauma comes up and it doesn't tell time, and it's trying to protect us. So my favorite, I feel like I'm throwing my firstborn child out the window. I love EMDR, and that's my first love. But, at our practice, we've all been doing accelerated resolution therapy, which is kind of like EMDR on steroids. It's just a little bit more easier for people to handle, and it's a lot quicker. Instead of, 6 months to a year, we're looking at 1 to 3 months maybe, and even see enough of a difference in a month. But we're really that's my favorite part, is that we go back. If I read it right here, I wrote down, it just reprograms the way which distressing memories and images are stored in the brain, so that they're no longer triggering those strong physical and emotional reactions. And if we can calm those, say to like a 9, I mean, all of us know we've been at a 10, right? But if we can calm those down to a 2 or a 3 or even a 0, then all our coping skills we can use, right? We can think about how we want to react, how we want to respond. But kind of getting that trauma out of us, that's my favorite part. And a lot of times people will come in because of betrayal trauma, and then we're working on childhood stuff, we're working on parent stuff, sibling stuff. And the more we can clear out, the calmer their bodies are. And the more they can just keep healing and healing, because they've been carrying around this whole life, but they don't know. So accelerated resolution therapy, it's a little bit newer. EMDR has more about 40 years of research, and this is, it was adapted from EMDR, but that's probably one of my favorite ones that we do.
That's very cool. I love that you say it's like EMDR on steroids, but it's more gentle, you said. But that sounds like it's a little more intense. Well, not gentle, but the clients can deal with it more for some reason. That's interesting.
Yeah, in EMDR, we sit through the memory, right? And we want to get it down to a 0, and we sit through it for even weeks, right? And so then our nervous system, I get clients where they'll just tell jokes, right? Instead of doing the EMDR, or they'll have to cancel, or they'll show up late, right? And they'll be like, we've been doing this for years. I'm like, we've only done this a couple of times, because there's just that avoidance. Who wants to say, come on, let's go look at your childhood trauma? And so with ART, we get through the whole trauma and even more in one session. So we might hit a couple of sessions, right, of different events or different life things, but we only ask them, instead of sitting in it for months, we ask them to sit in it for maybe 1 to 4 minutes, but we're still accessing that part of the brain where the memories are stored through that bilateral stimulation. Usually
I love therapy. Why does it? I don't know of anyone who ever says they don't like therapy. I just think you're crazy if you don't love therapy. I think it's fun to learn so much from you guys.
It's been the most, if I put one more plug in for it, I'm not doing this to sell it. Like,
no, but you're here but I'm glad that you have services that you can offer too.
I'm so passionate about it, because it's been one of the most spiritual things I've ever been a part of. No one said trauma work is spiritual, right? Like, I don't know. I just didn't put those two together when I went to school, but just seeing, people come down to their true selves. When you take away the trauma of what happened to you or what you've experienced, you really get to see that, I am lovable, I am enough, all those things that come up that we're really searching for.
Well, and therapists and coaches are the most compassionate and loving people, because they do have to validate all of their clients. You can't have a couple coming in to your session and saying, well, I like these kind of people, but I don't like those guys. That's just not in therapy's mentality. So yeah, Marnie and Kathy and Coach Robinson, do any of you guys want to say what you do with your clients? I'm excited to hear about Blues and your athletic stuff that you talk about.
Yeah, so working primarily with addiction, I've noticed patterns in the 20 years I've been doing this, that there's usually an activating event, and it's something that's trauma based. Like I said, about 2 years later, they find the coping mechanism, the substance, the behavior. It's kind of a weird thing. On average, it's about 2 years before anyone notices there's a problem. And so I always like to go back after they say, how old were you when you first viewed pornography? How old were you when you first had, chemical dependence or chemical, alcohol, substance? And you go back 2 years and you can find kind of where the trauma started, it was during my parents' divorce, or we moved from California to Utah. There's always something that just didn't sit right. And it takes about 2 years on average before you kind of figure it out. But then what I like to do is go to the core issue to find out what did you believe about yourself? I'm certified in EMDR too, but I do it a little bit different. When I first started Addict to Athlete in 2011, and I started my clients running as just as a different, I guess, aspect of recovery, support instead of just 12 steps. I started this thinking that it would just be a excuse to go running at lunchtime. But it ended up, as I was running with these clients, and as I was training them for this little 5K, they started talking a lot about stuff. Like, I didn't realize it was just EMDR. I wasn't, 2011, I had no idea what it was. But I'm like, this is really cool. Like, why are you guys telling me all this stuff out here in the open, but you won't do it in my feng shui office, right? And so what I do is literally, movement equals healing. And so I have in our gym, just a little gym right next to this podcasting room, we have 2 treadmills. I'll be on one and they'll be on the other. and they won't even realize it's happening. You start walking and putting the pitches up, and I can kind of remotely give them a little bit more stressor if I need to get them talking a little bit more. And it is wild how fast it pours. In fact, I'm doing a study right now with BYU. They're going to study how this form of EMDR works and how fast it does, because it's the same thing and they don't realize it's happening. So kids, when I work with the youth, we call them the minor league, right? That's the best thing for them because it's not so impersonal, right? You can get that. It feels like they're just going for a walk or something. So that's kind of the same modalities I use, but I do it kind of in motion. I'll do the bilateral stimulation face to face and whatnot, but I found that this works really well, and I'll be excited to get some of these results and share them with you guys. Yeah,
for sure. Would love that. That's very cool. Addicts to addict to athlete.
Yep.
So that's interesting because we've talked about this where I said I don't love the label of addict, but that's funny that you have it in your title because and what he said is that it's because we want to focus on what they're doing and not who they are as an individual and as a person.
Absolutely. It's why we use a Roman numeral 2 and not the number 2, because the Roman numeral system doesn't identify 0. So you can never be less than 1. And once you added number to it, and 2, that's how you build foundation. So that's a foundation. You can build structure on top of that. So it's kind of corny, but that's why we use it. Moving from one to the other. It's not
corny at all. It's very cool. I love it. It's so cool. But that's what I wanted to say too. Yeah, it's not who you are. It's what you might do, but it's not who you are.
It's part of you, not who you are. Yep.
Right. There you go. Okay, Kathy or Marnie, who wants to go next? Tell what you do.
I can go. I really love an internal family system. So, if we think about, there's an addict part of me and there's a recovery part. No, when you come into my office, usually both of those are present. And internal family systems just believes that there's this internal family, just like the external one. And so you have an addict part, you have a manager part. And when you validate that addict part, part of this particular therapy is just saying, hey, let that part know that you're really grateful for it. It may have saved your life at some point. And it's always an emotional experience for them to be able to thank that part for doing such a hard job. Mm-hmm. And if you're somebody that's experiencing betrayal trauma, this can sound like, are you kidding me? now we're thanking the part. That's just great. But I promise if you welcome all the parts, let the parts tell their story, allow them to have a different job. As long as I've done IFS, when I say, hey, what would that part like to do? If it didn't have to do this really tough job, there's just some beautiful responses. Like it would like to create. It would like to be a part of something. There's always a positive there. So I just love internal family systems.
That is cool. I want to learn more about that. That's very cool. I mean, I know there's two parts of me. One that says they want to be out there and doing stuff, and the other one says sit down and zip it all the time, or that just critiques me on the things that I put out there, and I have to hurry and delete it because that person wins over. I do that a lot. Yeah, Marnie.
Yeah, well, just even piggybacking on that, Kathy, I feel like being the betrayal trauma spouse, I had to ebb and flow between the empathy and sympathy I felt for my husband, knowing his exposure to pornography and kind of getting to the root when I understood like that, and how addiction, how I understood again with drugs and alcohol really wasn't that different. Yet I felt like with the sexual part, people were just like, what's wrong with you? Just stop. And getting to the root of what that was there is something else that really created why that became what it was. And so I love how, both you guys, Blue and Kathy, how you guys really talked about that too. So for me as a life coach, I work on a lot of what's moving forward. So most people, by the time they get to me, have worked with a therapist. And so they've been able to kind of diagnose and work through some things in their past. But for me, it's a lot of the working forward. And again, a lot of identifying their self-worth, who they are, trying to help achieve goals, A lot of times because of the emotional abuse, I refer to them as bullets. They've kind of had a lot of bullets coming at them that have been included with some truths that make them feel accountable for maybe what they don't need to. So it's like thinking of them coming at you in slow motion, and you get to kind of take some and work on those and then let go of others. Like if it doesn't apply. So a lot of my clients are coming from different places. It's men and women who have experienced betrayal trauma and now are in this redating world, or they're at the fork in the road of, do I get divorced? Do I stay or do I go? And of course, I'm here to support them where they're at and help them kind of process what that looks like, and the realism that divorce is hard. Staying married is hard. Both are really difficult. So where do we want to go and moving forward kind of with that? So, yeah, I would say that's my difference of like being able to kind of goals, helping them set things, and boundaries is a huge thing. Again, being their person to help them be accountable to the boundaries that they want to set. And even myself, I didn't know I could even have boundaries in my marriage. And now I know that there's things that I can. And now as someone's learning to retrust in people and dating, how to be confident enough and have the courage even to like end relationships they shouldn't be fighting for, just because they've invested time in it, or they want to seem loyal, and like they can all be, it's like, that's great, but you've known them 3 months. They don't get that from you. Like your 21-year marriage. But we don't want to look like we're a failure, we're giving up, and things like that.
A lot of them, the mental, the self-image, and the mental, thoughts and process.
Yeah, moving forward.
That's what I always think of. That's why I love working with therapists and coaches, because I think I like having both. Mm-hmm. I like having, we definitely want to do the deeper diving, and then you also want to have the encouraging, and then therapists are encouraging also. But yeah, I think it's awesome to have both different ways. So is there anyone in here who is participating who has any questions? I don't know. I haven't been given any. I haven't seen any. At least I might have missed. So raise your hand if you have a question, or if you want to speak up or show your face. That's fine too. I'm looking to see if I'm seeing anything. Has anyone seen any questions? Anyone have anything else they want to say? Oh, Kathy, I did want to ask you and Holly about your upcoming support groups, and then also Blue. I mean, anyone that has anything upcoming that we can share. Kathy and Holly have 2 support groups, one for betrayal trauma and one for the sex addiction.
They're both online, and they're going to start. We just have an introduction night on March 3rd, Friday night from 6 to 9, where the spouse and the partner that's struggling with addiction comes. Okay. Then after that, we separate into the males and the females, and we start diving into a curriculum. That's the 100-week curriculum, the 2-year program.
So it's like what Holly was saying, you're working with individual one.
Yeah, and a lot of the people don't just, a lot of some you can't always control, right, if your spouse is going to come, right? So we have a lot of people. I mean, I think I went through a program just like that, just me, right? So a lot of times it'll be just the male or just the female coming. So you don't always have to come as a couple, because you're paired up in between men and women. So just that first night, it's kind of being in a big meeting, bigger than this, right? Just that first night, and then you're in those smaller groups the rest of the time.
And is it online or in person?
Online.
Oh, online. Okay. You probably said that and I missed it. I'm having a couple of messages coming through too. There is someone who is asking, and so I'm wondering if you have a preference, David. He wants to know what is the best way he can support someone that is experiencing betrayal trauma recovery. What is the best way he can, as her boyfriend, what is the best way he can support her? Who wants to answer that? Marnie, you look like you had an answer.
I mean, I certainly feel like that is, I remember when I was dating, I'm like, I have a lot to take on because there's a lot. I think, I remember my therapist telling me just that I needed to be able to find someone that held so much integrity that despite my constant questions or challenging, that he just knew who he was. And I'm now remarried, but it's to someone who, because I have my own almost like amnesia, trauma amnesia. so I will forget things. And so he's patient in helping me remember some of those things. And part of that is also me looking for consistency in his stories as I like gain through trust. So trust is an absolute thing. Vulnerability and loving. I mean, it's really being able to let go. I would say also, being consistently honest. That is, and then managing like the triggers. I still have things that will come up that I don't even anticipate. I don't know. For me, I have to do like the tapping. And so he's learning how, like in those moments, what do you need from me? And it's for me, even because my kids know, it's like they talk to me. They just try to help talk to me, pull me out, kind of bring frontal lobe, and just until I can pull out. But there are certainly times where I personally will, it's that fight or flight. Like, and again, I feel like I'm in The Notebook, that book or the movie, where he has to help recall and bring me back to, because if I feel any sort of potential trauma, I protect myself, and then I become where I need his help in remembering. So I would say just if she's asking you a lot of questions, or she needs to see something, or, even if there's no reason for it, she's relearning to trust in herself. And even if she's wrong, then it's okay. But it was that I have the courage to be able to ask, and that I know that I feel safe. That if I'm going to ask, that it's like, okay, what do you need? What else can I do for you? Or how, and just being willing to know what that looks like.
And don't hold back because of maybe a judgment where you might say that's kind of odd to ask for that, and you should know better, or you should just trust me. I think
do you know who I am? Like, can't you tell? Like, I'm looking for that constantly.
Yeah. And then there'll be a day, just like Marnie expresses, that I can trust you now. And I see that you're trustworthy. I see that you've told me enough times that I can trust you, and you've shown me enough times that I'm at a point where I can trust you. So then if anyone else has more, I did want to ask Blue one last thing. I just only touched lightly. You have support. So talk about your support groups online that the people can come to.
Yeah, we have in person and online. If you can probably hear the group going on in the back right now, they're all working out. I can hear them counting their steps or something. Cool. Yeah, and what we do is we have like a 30 to 45 minute conversation about the positive aspects of recovery. We don't really talk about addiction like specific. So we have, we call them the muggles, the non-magic folk, those who've never used before, but just here to support a loved one. They're all in the next room, kind of working out in the group room. But we have groups all over the state. Addict to Athlete, we have chapters pretty much in 13 locations, and at the state prison. But don't go to that meeting. That's a special invitation. But we have primarily just addiction recovery groups, open gym. We do a pornography group that we've started, a men's and women's group. Both of those are separate, led by both our team captains, female, team captain male. And then we'll be doing a grief group coming up probably in the spring. We're going to be recycling our grief group. So there's a lot going on. Get on addicttoathlete.org. All of that information's on there.
That's so good. Awesome. Yes, we'll do that. We'll get more.
And then, it's all free. It's all free of charge.
Yeah. If you watch him and his wife come on Wednesday nights and do the Q&A for anything, right? Any kind of coaching questions?
Yep.
You have about that he talks about, or addiction recovery. Okay. Does anyone else have anything? I did mention in some of my advertisements that if anyone that comes onto the class has anything to share too, any kind of coaching support or anything else, we just want this community to be a place where people can find support in any modality, any way they need, any personality they like. So I will drop links for all of you guys in this post when I put it on YouTube, and then I'll share it with you, the links for that. You can share them. So thank you guys, awesome. All of you, for being here and all that you shared. And if we have any other questions, we'll for sure direct them to the right people, awesome. That they want.
Thank you guys. Athletes, such a great opportunity to be able to speak with these professionals and their caliber, and you can see how passionate they all are. Please follow their resources and jump into some of the things they're doing. Specifically, if you find yourself in a situation by which you are experiencing that betrayal trauma, even if you don't quite understand what it is, these are great individuals for you to reach out. Their descriptions and locations and abilities will be posted along with this podcast. I want to thank them for allowing me to share this with you, this message of healing and overcoming adversity through really allowing your heart to heal, and it can be done. Athletes, until next time, please continue to turn that mess of addiction into the message of your sobriety.
We would like to thank our Patreon subscribers. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon, check out patreon.com/addictoathlete. There you can see our fundraising platforms and gain access to all of our bonus episodes and receive exclusive A2A swag. We'd like to thank our superfans, Karen Hardy, Steve Riggs, Tracy Whitby, Jerem Thurston, Tara Butson, Holly Davies, Scott Foster, Brett Frew, Chris Williams, and Sensei KP Brown. Then our rookie levels, Sione Mary Inuk, Sherry Polson, and Earl Dyer. Pro level, Andrew Baird, Wendell Wood, and Gary Thurston. And champion level subscribers, the Robinson family, and Ron and Dee Loesch. Thank you all. Check out patreon.com.